Welcome to the Shaftesbury Podcast. We're here on the first day. We've been allowed to meet outside again, so we're out in the garden. You'll hear nice relaxing sounds of birds and trees rustling in the background. Pleased that you could join us either online or on YouTube. And we're here to think a little bit about the Resilience series that we launched just recently. But perhaps for some people tuning in, they've not heard of the Shaftesbury Partnership for the first time. So Nat, love you just to give us a little bit of an intro to what the Shaftesbury Partnership is, what it does.
The Shaftesbury Partnership is an organisation set up over 10 years ago now to really pioneer approaches to tackling inequality and systemic problems in society. A lot of the early years, Patrick, myself and I and others were involved in starting new ventures. They could be charities, businesses, things like the Challenge Network, which helped pioneer National Citizenship Service, a number of other ventures too. And more recently, the focus has shifted to helping other organisations develop their capacity to launch new system-changing initiatives, and also starting to train individuals to become social innovators as well.
Great. Now, the Resilience series is obviously thinking about resilience on a very big scale, but resilience is also a personal question. So, Patrick, let's start with you. What's really tested your resilience in the last 12 months?
Well, the simplest answer is my dad died. Christmas 2019, my dad was in hospital, and the whole of last year was dealing with elderly, sick parents in the middle of COVID, which meant that everything that you might have thought about caring for elderly parents had to be rethought. That was several months ago, and it's still something that affects me. I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but every so often I realise something's missing from my life that was there for the previous 50 odd years.
Yep. So it affects that ability to keep bouncing back. Nat, what does the last year look like for you in resilience?
Yeah, similar. We've been fairly fortunate. Not many close family have passed away either because of COVID or not, but certainly within our circle we've had both people pass away from COVID as well as not actually being able to either get treatment or, a friend of mine had an accident in the mountains, actually walking with his kids, and just hit his skull, hit his skull, and then he's gone. Not that much older than me. So obviously there's that. On top of that, I think for me, the family, for many others that we know, has been the shift to having to be working remotely, home educating, obviously, which we did before COVID. But we certainly for many of our younger our friends of younger kids, that's been a particular challenge. And just that working out, how do we have a routine now that you can't use the commute as your kind of way to mark shifting from family and sort of rest time to work time. That's been a pretty full on thing.
Yeah, I know for me, we had a baby 6 months ago, and so many of the COVID restrictions just complicated that, and so that ability to just cope with some of the complications that were there in pregnancy anyway for us were just harder to cope with, harder to bounce back from because of the various things that were happening around COVID. And so in that case for me it was a number of different things compounding together that was really affecting my resilience.
Well, having a first child is already a big resilience challenge in life, isn't it?
Yeah,
to have it in a pandemic is
so both of us have had a major life event under lockdown.
Yep.
And life events we know something about. A lot of work at Shaftesbury Partnership has been around transitions in the life course and so on. But whatever you knew about how to do it, all of the stuff that we take for granted, like how family will operate, suddenly you can't do it. So we're making it up as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've obviously mentioned lockdown, COVID, pandemic a number of times. That's why we're sat out in the garden and got our coats on, and we're actually happy about it because, at least we can do this even if we can't be indoors. But talk to us, Nat, a little bit about why now for the Resilience series. There's an obvious theme because of what's happened, but you were thinking and talking about resilience before the pandemic as well.
Yeah, I think certainly in the Shaftesbury Partnership, we've often realised that a lot of the things that need fixing in the world are because we live in systems, in a world of systems. You know, whether that's the NHS, whether that's the way the traffic works, everything is a system. And sometimes we can so easily, certainly in politics or even in business, focus on the one thing that we see, the one challenge. You know, maybe the beds are filling up in hospitals or whatever it is, but we don't think about how it all connects together. And so, you know, resilience within systems, and Patrick's more of an expert on this, is a really important concept. You imagine, you know, something like Kevlar or a fishing net can be so strong because of all the connections within that system, compared to something, you know, like a piece of concrete that looks really hard, but if you shoot a bullet in a piece of concrete, you get a different result from shooting in Kevlar. And so when the pandemic hit, it became really, really obvious that this was testing our resilience. This has been a really painful stress test period, if you like, where it feels very uncomfortable. You know, whether you're Kevlar or a piece of concrete, when you get shot, you know, it feels uncomfortable, I'm sure. But where actually in one case you're getting stronger. You know, there's this word going around called anti-fragile, things that, like our immune system, get stronger the more you hit it, in principle. So I think that's been a very important idea. And then I wrote a lot in the early phases of the first lockdown about, you know what, the internet is actually a tool that was created to help us to be resilient. It was, you know, invented as part of defense, particularly in America, initially, the underlying technology behind the internet. So that should there be, you know, a nuclear war, we could all get on. It wouldn't just be if you hit one central place, you could take out the entire country. You could carry on. And, you know, for all of its challenges, going online this last year has enabled us to be resilient. We'd had a very, very different experience if we couldn't still communicate and work with each other. But, you know, as I've written in some articles, I think we lost sight of the purpose of the internet and things like the internet a few years ago, and we've all been very entertained and we've got Netflix and so on, but actually we forgot, we need to figure out how to do live music, you know, on the internet together. We've got to figure out how to do some of the things that we haven't figured out yet properly. And so the work isn't finished. And so that led to the idea that we need to really focus on resilience. And how do we rebuild in a way moving forwards, whether in terms of healthcare, or in terms of the way we run things as governments, you know, the Parliament itself has gone remote. All of these things need to now be re-evaluated and rebuild again, but with resilience built in from the start.
So we launched the Resilience series, which is the first in a number of events that we're going to be doing. Nat spoke at that. Patrick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on things that stuck out, things that you thought were really noteworthy, not only from what Nat was saying, but also from some of the Q&A that we engaged with after that.
Well, I think the first thing that came across from the Q&A was what a great audience, what a great group we had in terms of the quality of the questions, but also the way we think about systems is very conditioned on where we come from. I don't just mean like, do you come from Finland or do you come from Morocco, but am I an engineer? You know, an engineer's idea of what resilience looks like is very different from me as someone coming from financial markets, right? At the highest level, we don't want the thing to fall over and we don't want it to cost too much. But engineers spend many years learning how to do that with buildings. In financial markets, we spent many years learning how to do that with banking systems. Then you get a situation like a ship getting jammed in the Suez Canal, which is disrupting financial markets, and it requires an engineer to fix it. And so time and again, I've been reflecting on it's the collision of worldview, it's a collision of different systems, and however adept we are at what we know, we're all having to figure out new sets of issues in how these things interact.
Love it. Nat, any thoughts that stood out from you?
Yeah, I think just that recognition that we are in a new era, even frankly before the pandemic, things like Brexit, the rise of populism in politics, we're going to see potentially that again in Europe this coming year. These things are all shocks to the system, the system that we've had for 60, 70 years post-war, the Bretton Woods, all of these systems that were built for a new start back then, but arguably now in the age of the internet, in the age of all kinds of threats to our countries, to our infrastructure, they're being stress tested and challenged, and they need building up. Doesn't mean we have to destroy them all and start again. That would be war. Would do that, but it does mean we have to reevaluate. Okay, is it right that everything gets decided in this one place? That all the command and control works from these places, or do we have to build parallel systems that work with those? Either in health, education. Think about all the challenges we've had around teaching through online channels and the nuances. How do we stay human in the midst of all of this? Whether we build more decentralized ways of doing things, whether we stay with many of our command and control systems that serve you well in a crisis, but how do you do that in a way where we don't lose some of our freedoms, our humanity, our ability to kind of stay spontaneous? These are all questions that we need to kind of work through together, and we're really looking forward to the series being a way to explore in a deeper way each time, and then at the end to come up with a new kind of, we half jokingly call it the Robusta Carta, just like the Magna Carta was a way of documenting a new way of doing things. The king isn't going to be the only person in charge of everything. Similarly, can we find a way to design this more resilient world in a way that people can participate? And we're really excited to explore ways in which people can participate in that process.
So I think some of the things that stuck out to me was the need to think so broadly, and the need not to just think about the immediate. Right now it seems there's probably nobody who's thinking that resiliency against global pandemics is not a valid topic. But you probably don't have to go back that many years to hear in the news stories of governments that were trying to put something in place but struggled to get there. How many people were talking about the Suez Canal getting shut off, which is suddenly now having an impact around the world. And so what are the other things that we're not thinking about? How do we think outside of the box? How do we think about the interconnected nature of all those things? I think is really important. And we experimented on the night with a new technology called Swarm, which was brought to us by our partners Unanimous, who have this technique and strategy for pooling the wisdom that is within groups of people without a simple voting that just gets us a kind of perhaps a result that isn't quite as clever as it could be. Love to hear your thoughts on that. The Swarm on the night actually thought that cyber warfare threats to cyber security were some of the biggest things. But love to hear, Patrick, your thoughts on the technology, on our experience of using it, or anything like that. Well,
when I was in the city, we were one great big hive of decision making, whether that be within an individual team, within an institution, or across the aggregate of institutions in the wholesale markets. And I've been in many investment meetings where you can see how people are not enjoying the process because it feels tired. And so for me, what I loved about the Swarm model was it was fresh. And I wish I could have had it 15, 20 years ago, when we're trying to invigorate a process where, sadly, you kind of know what someone's going to say. And obviously we know about this in terms of political conflict or some of the other areas. We know that because of people's ideology, they will have a very strong view which is incompatible with mine. So how on earth do we find some way through that isn't a power play? And I think that the work that Unanimous have done is a really interesting one, and I look forward to testing it until we break it, and then we can find out how it really works.
Yeah, absolutely. Nat, you love to go out and find these new technologies, these new tools. Love to hear some of your thoughts on it.
I think it's a bit of a game changer, and I don't say that lightly. We've always known that the wisdom of crowds is something worth tapping into. Arguably, that's how democracy arose. Financial stock markets, in a way, tap that wisdom. We're seeing right now, but in many ways, there are flaws built into those systems of tapping in the wisdom. Financial markets, you can see there's problems when there's momentum, when there's false signals that get amplified. Similarly, in democracy, we've seen really dramatically the last few years that if you've got, depending on the turnout, 30-40% of people's view can lead to a president or prime minister or a referendum answer. What happens to everybody else who had the other view? But before they were expected to basically shut up and not say anything. Now with social media and protesting and so on, people can contest the answer in a democratic process, either through direct or indirect democracy. Whereas if you go to the source, which I think Unanimous really have been doing, they've gone to, okay, where in nature is this happening? Actually, insects, particularly honeybees, the decisions they make around which hive to go to, which is a life and death decision. If you get that wrong, when a bunch of bees that have overgrown the hive go out and find a new home from something like 6 options, if they get that wrong, they die in that winter. So they have to get it right, and they get it right about 85% of the time. Now the challenge is they communicate using this complex system of dancing, waggle dances. Humans, we don't know how to interpret things like how strongly do you feel about the answer. In fact, do you know anything about the answer? A bunch of us are good. Sometimes I do this. We can blag, we can pretend we know, but we don't. And so all these signals and noise is there when we make decisions together. And what the technology, the machine learning does, is amplify the signals from the humans so that we get to more of a right answer. And it's been proven to be incredibly, powerful. And we look forward to using this in future events through the Resilience series in our own, different spheres of work. I think it's going to really help make decision making, and it's going to make governance more resilient. Because when they've done tests in the UK recently, I think 60-70% of people feel much more satisfied with the end result, even if their vote didn't, get through, compared to traditional referenda or representative democracy, where it's 30% if you're lucky of satisfaction. Now, if the majority are satisfied with the decision, even if the majority didn't originally vote for that choice, that's going to be a much more resilient choice. We're not going to be wanting to shoot it down the moment we've decided to go in a certain direction, and that's going to be important moving forward.
So looking to the future then, we've had one event, we've now got a number of events to come. We've already hinted at the fact that Swarm and those concepts will be important to us, because as we think about those being useful for resilience in the future, we don't just want to talk about them in the absence of those tools, we want them involved again. What would be some of your hopes? We'll come to you first, Patrick. What would be some of your hopes for the future of the series?
So, first of all, I think I'm really keen. I think, Nat, at some point you talked about being human. The problem with algorithms, the problem with machine learning, is it feels very impersonal. It feels very reductive. And I think that the steps being made in the technology in recent years have addressed that. But as we creep out of our little individual holes after lockdown, we need to relearn what it is to be a social animal. And that's emotional, that's relational, obviously it's about being productive and effective. So you can't do a resilient society in one session. But I would hope that by the end of the series, we'll have a really nice view of what resilient society looks like and how to get there.
That's great. Nat, some final words from you on the hopes for the future of the series?
Well, the great thing, as we can see, it's a sunny day today. Spring is here, summer is coming, but we also need to remember winter and autumn are beyond the summer, so things are cyclical, right? So both it's going to be really fun and interesting to see as we emerge and have to relearn how to socialise and work in offices and so on, to be resilient in that context, because there are certain skills we're having to re-educate ourselves around. And I think also to make the most of perhaps things we in the past took for granted. When you get to see someone, when you get to have a little bit of breakfast or a picnic, those little analogue social things are really important, and perhaps we took them for granted. And to enjoy and to learn how to make the most of those times when you maybe can see someone. I'll be seeing my parents soon this week for the first time in a year, 6 months. It feels like a year. So learning how to do human well, if that makes sense. That sounds so weird. But also not forgetting that we learn a bunch of things online. How do we continue? How do we make sure when we get locked down again, God forbid if that were to ever happen, we can still play music synchronously? There is technology people have worked on but gave up on 3-4 years ago, which we need to go back to create that kind of live experience online. So we mustn't just sort of go, well, we're coming out now, let's go back to normal. No, let's make the most of normal, whatever normal looks like. Let's also make sure we hone our ability to be resilient, whether we have the internet or whether we don't have the internet. And let's make sure we're resistant to things like those cyber attacks, resistant to some of the climate change events that are on their way, trade disruption. There's any number of things. We need to cherish the moments that we have together and prepare for whatever will hit us, and make sure that every time we get hit, we'll come out stronger.
Well, that seems like a good place to end our conversation today. Nat, Patrick, been great to chat with you about resilience and the Resilience series. You've been listening to the Shaftesbury Podcast. If you want to find out more about where we are, then find us on Twitter, find us on YouTube. Our website is spx.ventures. We look forward to seeing you at one of our Resilience series events in the very near future.